For God, for country, for truth, for justice, for the Republic. You're listening to the Powder Monkey Podcast on PirateInfoWars.com. Welcome to episode 29 of the Powder Monkey Podcast. This episode I've decided we're going to call We Are Not Afraid and We Don't Care. And that's spelled C.A.I.R. It's an acronym. And so we'll get into that here in just a little bit. I'm really happy to have my guest on today. I stayed up a good bit last night, just kind of like it was Christmas. This is something that is important to me. It's something that I really have sort of lost focus on bringing light to. So I'm kind of glad that this has come together today. My guest is Dave Gaubatz. He is founder, author, and counterterrorism, counterintelligence authority extraordinaire. He is the premier authority on the Muslim Brotherhood. His book, Muslim Mafia, Inside the Secret Underworld That's Conspiring to Islamize America, is unsurpassed in the world of counterterror. His investigative team exposed the largest Muslim conspiracy in U.S. history, uncovering over 12,000 documents and 300 hours of audio-video materials relating to criminal terrorist activity. And that's against America. So, he's best known to the public for his work, but he's also known as the terrorist hunter. And aside from co-authoring the Magna Carta of books on the Muslim underworld, Dave Gaubatz is a U.S. State Department-trained Arabic linguist and retired federal agent with the U.S. Air Force Office of Special Investigations. And among his many achievements, he has investigated felony crimes against the U.S. Air Force and, the government, and was the very first special civilian agent deployed to Nasiriyah, Iraq in 2003 for Operation Iraqi Freedom. He's received extensive training and experience in Islamic ideology and tactics, and that's including from former members of Islamic terror groups, as well as from Muslim military and law enforcement who served under the late former Iraqi President Saddam Hussein. So, with over 3 decades of combined experience in this arena, Dave held top-secret SCI clearance on counterintelligence and counterterrorism matters for over 15 years, and he's received the highest levels of intelligence, including for weapons of mass destruction and espionage. He's also been briefed into many black project programs for U.S. national security purposes, and has been assigned to numerous counterintelligence and counterterrorism operations. I could go on and on and on, but The point of it is that this gentleman brings quite a bit of gravitas to the conversation we're going to have tonight. So, Dave, welcome to aboard the Powder Monkey podcast. I'm really excited that you're here.
All right, thank you so much, Sean. It's an honor to be on your show.
I guess I want to start with you had me at terrorist hunter, and so I kind of maybe want to start there. When I contacted you, I told you that I think that maybe you would have a little bit of expertise, whether abroad or domestic. What a terrorist is. I think you would have a little bit of gravitas to your testimony here tonight. Would that be true?
Yeah, I'm not good in a lot of things, but understanding Islam and the terrorist threat coming from Islam is something I've studied for over 3 decades.
Mm-hmm. And so, with it, let's start with this. The word terrorist, there have been, I guess the initial correspondence that I sent to you, I included a quote by former CIA director John Brennan, and this was in reference to the Biden intel community. He said that they're now moving in laser-like fashion to try to uncover as much as they can about what looks very similar to insurgency movements that we've seen overseas, where they germinate in different parts of the country, they gain strength, and it brings together an unholy alliance, frequently, of religious extremists, authoritarians, fascists, bigots, racists, nativists, even libertarians. And so, I could kind of see the, after, everything was settled and, what happened in D.C. and all that mess, then the word domestic terrorism began to furl there and in the news cycles and whatnot. And some of the people that I've had on my show are being used and pointed out and and labeled as terrorists. So I just maybe want to know, what are the hallmarks of a terrorist? Whether do they have similarities, whether it's abroad or, I guess, here in the homeland?
Well, the definition essentially of terrorism is to incite fear in order to achieve whatever objective it may be. Now, a terrorist is the person who actually goes out and does the inciting and does the terrorist acts. As far as we go in America, a terrorist is defined as someone who is attempting to incite fear inside America, inside Americans, and for an objective in this regard related to the advancement of Islam, and they do that through very violent acts. So when you talk about domestic terrorists here in America, like many of the communist liberals are doing today, they're talking about American citizens who are trying to protect this country, not to destroy the country, but to protect the country, which our leaders currently are not doing. And so that's the big difference. With Islamic-based terrorism, they are, their own words are to destroy America and to destroy Israel. Domestic terrorists, the so-called label that has been given, are people who are doing their very best to make sure that children in America do not suffer and that we have the America that we were meant to have.
And I guess that's one thing. I've always equated, I guess, our social contract with buying a car. If I were to try to sell somebody a car and then change the rules of the contract or redefine what the contract is, or redefine the terms in the contract, I would be prosecuted, sued.
Yeah.
But But, that kind of is happening to what, what we have here in America. And even, West Virginia is sort of a, it's always sort of been a blue Democrat state. But when I talk to a lot of people, just both in passing and, maybe knocking doors, or whatever, a lot of the people said, that's not my party. My party left me. And, and I guess maybe that's sort of where we, I guess I'm misunderstanding. Is the old lady holding the flag, in the rotunda of the Capitol? Is she a terrorist? I mean, is that really what we are scared of? I mean, with the Fort Hood shooting, they were so reluctant to even call that terrorism.
Exactly. The difference is the lady holding the flag in D.C. or in West Virginia or in California holding the American flag is considered a domestic terrorist by terrorists themselves, who are the communist liberal leaders currently in America. So, of course, anyone who goes against communism, liberalism, socialism is a threat, and they are considered a terrorist. Actually, our contract in America, you talked about the C.A.I.R contract. Our contract is the U.S. Constitution. Mm-hmm. And we were given the U.S. Constitution by very intelligent people over 200 years ago, and we, as Americans, expect to live our lives through the U.S. Constitution and under God. And that is what communism, the socialist liberals like Biden and his whole crew are trying to take away from Americans. They're trying to rip up the contract that we signed on to over 200 years ago. Americans do not want to lose our contract, which is the U.S. Constitution, and they won't allow it to be lost. And our forefathers put that into the Constitution, that there are going to be enemies from outside the U.S. and from within the U.S. that Americans at some point are going to have to stand up and defend against, because they are going to try to rip that contract up, and true, pure Americans are just not going to allow it.
Right. And that's, I guess, you have an extensive background in terrorism, and so when I say the date, April 19th, that means something to you. And
well,
go ahead.
Yeah. What I was going to say, there are so many dates throughout history that people have that point to terrorist events and when we defend against terrorism. But basically, the one that stands out to me, as well as millions of other people, is September 11th.
Yes.
That was when, at one point in the last 50 years, that Americans have united, but almost immediately you had the communists come in and who were trying to separate, cause disunity among Americans, and it didn't take long before that to happen.
Right. Well, with April 19th, the reason I said that also is my birthday. So I have experienced, twice, in my life, just and to see those things happen, and the gradual over the decades that the demonization of the returning military veterans, and how now those people who wrote a blank check and put everything on the line, now they're public enemy number one once they return. But their ideology isn't to destroy America. They wrote the ultimate check, and I don't understand that. And you had mentioned documents and training and things like that, and I don't understand how. I guess first of all, how so many people would allow that type of rhetoric to filter into. I mean, how does that? I mean, do you have any? Can you speculate on that, or can you speak to that?
Well, Sean, I think that's a very good question. Now, as far as when we talk about the U.S. Constitution, there have been people for decades, specifically in the 40s and 50s, communists who were trying to overthrow America over a time period. But now it's come to the head where in the 50s, you dare not say that you were a communist, you hated America, especially as a politician. But now, and in Hollywood, but now today, it's almost an honor for these people to step forward and say, I am a communist or a socialist, I do not like America, I hate America, I do not like the flag. You know, when you say April 19th, are you referring specifically to Oklahoma City?
Well, the Oklahoma City bombing and just all the tragedy, you know, and on all the, you know, on every aspect of that,
exactly.
It just is, you know, you kind of, it's one of those dates where you don't forget where you were. And especially if it's your birthday, you know, it makes an impact on you. So, you know, I guess with that though, how does one legally, lawfully, you know, I know that being vocal, but when you have a former CIA director coming on talking about how, you know, they're moving in laser-like fashion and you know, the amount of technology that is, you know, available to just, I have so many friends that won't talk or comment, or, you know, now it's just they have been essentially chilled or silenced, and that's a bad precedent, I think.
Well, that's also a form of terrorism, to silence people, to make them so fearful, and in this case, fearful of their own government, to do what's something under the U.S. Constitution is free speech. When there comes a time, Sean, in America where I'm afraid to say something about my own government, if I think that something's being done wrong, or to talk about Islamic-based terrorism, people who are trying to harm this country, then that would be the day that I raise the white flag of surrender. And I really don't see a day coming like that, because once you do that, once you raise the white flag, then you have really essentially just indentured yourself to the government. You've indentured yourself to the enemies who were trying to overthrow this country. And there are many patriots out there who will never do that. Now, I don't advocate a war or violence. I've seen enough of it when I was in Iraq and other conflicts.
Right.
I don't advocate that, but I can say that American patriots are not going to allow this country to be taken away from our children. They're not going to be allowed the flag and the Constitution and the hundreds of thousands of Americans who have died throughout the centuries to protect this country. They're not going to let it just go away. No one wants war. No one wants conflict. But in the end, if you get pushed enough by terrorists, which in this case I'm talking about communist terrorists and I'm talking about Islamic terrorists, people are going to fight back. There comes a point where a cardboard poster protesting downtown peacefully does not do the job. There's never been a war won with a cardboard poster. We would have never won in Germany or against Japan or in Iraq or Afghanistan or wherever. We would never have won the war with just a cardboard poster. You don't want war, but Americans, one thing pure, true Americans don't do is they don't run. The 4,000 plus that have died in Iraq and Afghanistan over the last couple decades, they did not run. They did not wave the white flag of surrender. And American patriots here in this country are not going to run either. The people who are silenced right now, who are afraid to talk, probably shouldn't have been talking 5 and 10 and 15 years ago. If you're not going to talk when it's needed, then you surely shouldn't be talking when it's not needed. You've got to speak up for your country, especially when your country's been attacked.
Right. So I think we've covered that, I guess, and it's safe to say, as somebody who has some background in authority, that I can sleep at night knowing that I am not out radicalizing children to the right. American ideal. So, okay, good deal. So let's move on, and let's peel this onion back, because I see it in my mind as an onion here, and I'm holding in my hand a sworn affidavit that you put together and that you will freely, send to anybody who is interested. And I'm just going to read a note that you put in here, and just to kind of set the precedent, and then we'll talk about, Islam. I'm going to let you kind of, you put this together, so I'm going to kind of let you, discuss it in the manner and fashion that you have. If I have a question, I'm going to, speak up, but I kind of want you to, to have the ability to have more than just a few minute segments or clips somewhere to try to shoehorn, decades worth of experience and work into, into one segment. But on that, in this note, you said, when I conduct counterterrorism research in America, it is my objective to expose Islam when Islam requires exposing, which is 24/7. Anything I do or any materials I uncover are for public release. It is my policy to provide to the public my raw intelligence first before providing to all others. Only the American public can protect America. It is the responsibility of the public to demand politicians and our senior law enforcement to do the job which they have sworn an oath to do, which is protect America and, most importantly, protect our children. The public must also demand our media report the news based on facts and evidence, and not their personal political agendas, as it is now the case by far in America. With that being said, would you agree with the term mockingbird media? Do you think that exists in that form? Maybe not the actual Project Mockingbird, but just the spirit of it at the very least.
I would ask that you define what you're saying about mockingbird. What is your definition of mockingbird? Then I can tell you if I agree or disagree.
Well, and I'm by no means a scholar on it, but what I mean by mockingbird is just the spirit of a narrative that is inorganic. It is maybe constructed and put into media in a manner to coerce or, for all intents and purposes, possibly program. Would you agree with that? Would you say that?
Okay, I do agree that our media is more along now the lines of a state-run type media, where they have been given marching orders, political, and I'm talking about not just the CNN, MSNBC, but to a large extent, even Fox for the conservative. They've been given their marching orders on what to say, what not to say, and it is to influence the people. The media is not what it used to be 50 years ago, where they provided fact-based, they truly went out and investigated something. Now the majority of times our media already has the full story. Shortly after any incident even happens, they already know who to blame, who's responsible for it, yet it takes years to get an investigation through Congress of any type. We've tried to get investigations against Hillary Clinton for her criminal activities, and against James Comey, the former FBI director, who committed very blatant criminal acts against America. Yet the media it takes 2 minutes for them now to decide that all of a sudden that on 6th January 2021 that our president, one of the best presidents we've ever had, President Trump, was instigating violence and riots with all the stuff that has happened with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, which are nothing more than a Marxist organization. You never hear CNN downplaying Antifa or BLM, but all of a sudden you get American patriots who go to Washington, D.C., and only a handful, actually went into the Capitol. The majority were very peaceful, doing nothing but protesting, true peaceful protesting, and all of a sudden everyone now who is a conservative is a domestic terrorist. Now CNN, MSNBC, and one of their leaders, Al Sharpton, who I say is equivalent to a journalist with a third-grade education, are now calling American patriots domestic terrorists. It's sad. They've got their agenda. They already know when a story pops up how they're going to go after it. They've already got the conclusion before they have the basic initial facts. And being a former federal agent, I base everything that I do, all the investigations, and that affidavit that you were reading a part of.
Yes, sir.
I base it only on first-hand evidence. If I don't have first-hand evidence, I don't discuss it. If I put something in an affidavit, it is because I would go before any court in the U.S. and I would swear to it under oath about what I found out. I think the one you're referencing is probably the one I went to in South Charleston when I went to a mosque in the South Charleston within the last year. Is that the one you're referencing?
Yes, sir. It is.
Okay.
And so the I guess, and as I understand it, I think traditionally you start with, what is a Muslim, and I guess for people who don't know, I know that there have been instances where that's they radicals have gone in and stabbed people, and the test they used was asking people what are the pillars of Islam, and so I guess maybe let's start there if you want to, or you start where you want to, but I guess maybe with that, I'm looking at it here. You and you have a full, alphabet, basically, a full set of criteria that, and we'll get into that as well. But, you said, when I give presentations, I'm often asked if I feel all Muslims are bad or evil people. And to answer this, it is vitally important to define who a Muslim is.
That's so important, because when you first talked about, you said a radical Muslim going in somewhere and stabbing people. Well, the first thing that I try to educate people on, and I've trained over 10,000 law enforcement throughout America, the first thing I try to teach people about Islam specifically is that there is no such thing as a moderate Muslim, a radical Muslim, any other type Muslim. There is only a pure Muslim, and that's not according to Dave Gaubatz. Me, I've been in over 400 mosques in the United States alone, where I've conducted research anywhere from 1 day up to 6 months in a particular mosque. And when I go into mosques, one of the criteria I look at, I talk with the Islamic leaders, and I ask them a lot of these questions. What is a Muslim? Is there a radical Muslim? Are there moderate Muslims? Because Sean, we always hear from people who say, well, I know lots of good Muslims, that my neighbor is a good Muslim, he would help me and my family out, or she would, or my doctor is a Muslim, they're the best people I know. And my answer to that is, if indeed they are very, very good people, honest people, then they are not Muslim, they are apostates of Islam. because Islam does not allow for a person to be good. If you've got a neighbor and say that neighbor is actually a pure Muslim as defined by Islamic, 100% Sharia compliant, they believe in everything Prophet Muhammad did as a good character and as an example for people to follow, then that person cannot be good, because under Sharia law there are many peaceful aspects of it, like the how to eat, how to drink, how to sleep, marriage, divorce. But then there are so many violent aspects about physical jihad qital, and about child marriages, and concerning slavery. There are so many, and killing innocent non-Muslims throughout the world. That is all a part of Sharia. In order to be a pure Muslim, you have to adhere to Sharia law 100%, not 95%, not 98%. I use an analogy with the Ten Commandments. It's like with a Christian. You got the Ten Commandments. Are you truly a Christian? And I'm not one to judge if you are or not. If you say, well, I like Commandment 1, 6, and 8, but I am not going to follow 2, 3, and 7.
Right.
I'm just not going to follow those. Then are you truly a Christian? Well, that is not for me to judge, but I can say within Islam, they do judge. If you pick apart Sharia law and say, well, I know I do not accept child marriages, and I think that what Prophet Muhammad did when he raped Aisha when she was 6 years old is a pure example of what Muslims should do, then can you be a good person if that's what you believe?
Right.
If you believe that a 6-year-old child down the street can be married to a 50-year-old man and it's justified, and you advocate that type behavior to essentially rape young children, whether you help your neighbor shovel their snow or you're a good doctor who is compassionate to your patient, if you have that in your heart that you desire and advocate the rape of young children, are you a good person?
So,
can you be a good person?
Let me ask you this. The term Muslim American, then, it's an oxymoron. It can't exist, basically.
Right. I say the same thing with African American, and I don't mean any disrespect in that. Mm-hmm. But we don't have. When my family was in German. I don't call myself a German American,
right,
or a French American. No more. Either you're an American or you're not an American. Well, and either you're a Muslim or you're not a Muslim.
Well, and the thing that gets me though is when they use that term, it's used and thought of, but Muslim is not a race; it is an ideology.
Right.
So, it cannot, I guess it's one of those sort of laws of physics things. It can't exist, two things can't exist in one place. And that's what it sounds like to me if, as you're putting it out, it's either hot or cold. You either are or you're an apostate. And if you're an apostate, you're no better than, than an
infidel.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're no better than a non-Muslim. And again, this is according to Islam, and this is according to what are currently in the 3,500 plus mosques in America, the material that's in there. They never talk about moderate Muslims or radicals or extremists. They don't use those terms. They say you're either pure Muslim or you're an apostate of Islam. If you're an apostate of Islam, then you are subject to being killed anywhere, any place, Chicago, West Virginia, Africa, Saudi Arabia, wherever it may be. You're either Muslim and you advocate Sharia 100%, and or you're an apostate and enemy of Islam. And fortunately, Sean, when I say, are there good Muslims? Well, again, Islam does not allow for a person to be good. If you believe in throwing homosexuals off of buildings and killing them because they're homosexual, you cannot be a good person. I'm sorry. I don't care if you shovel the snow of your neighbor. If you believe in throwing a homosexual off a building and killing them, you are not a good person, and you cannot be considered a good person.
What did Jesus say? Even a little leaven leaveneth. So, it's that, that it is. You're absolutely right. And, again, I guess it has that hallmark, whether it's, I guess Islam, or whether it's what you see with Epstein and everything that's going on there. It always goes back to the children. It always goes back to people who I guess, at least on the surface, have that appearance of, forthrightness, and they're admired, and I guess, again, like I said, it's an onion, and if they are, I guess, let's talk about, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but taqiyya, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Right, taqiyya, deception.
Okay, so how, if you have somebody with that mindset, and I guess maybe that's something else I'd like to know is when this is occurring, when they're going out and they're actually acting upon, they're having, I guess, what would be called the courage of their convictions at that point, and they're out, stabbing people or mass, becoming a mass shooter. What goes on in the mind of that person? I'm sure they feel, justified and vindicated, and even if they've, I guess.
Well, I think I know where you're going with this, Sean, and I'm on the same track with you. Now, coming from a military background, before I was an agent, a civilian federal agent, I served 20 years in the Air Force, and I use the same analogy with that. When we went to war, it was hard in Iraq when we were calling in the coordinates for a house, and you knew possibly that families may be in the house, innocent people may die, but we felt that, being trained military, that it was a part of war, that it had to be done. And within Islam, when you're talking about taqiyya, deception, it's a part that they have been raised from birth to believe. Anything that will advance Islam toward their ultimate goal. The ultimate goal of Islam is to form an Islamic caliphate, ummah, nation, worldwide and under Sharia law. So anything that advances that objective, whether it's lying straight to the face from a Muslim leader to a non-Muslim leader, lying right to the face, which they do each and every day. Saudi Arabia does it each and every day. Iran does it each and every day. Then it's justified, and they don't even blink an eye when they're doing it, because it advances Islam. Anything that advances Islam is within the character of their Prophet Muhammad, and anything he did is very admirable and should be copied each and every day.
Do you have any, I know that you mentioned first-hand accounts, and I guess when you're trying to, especially when you're over there and you're trying to determine who is and who isn't, and you mentioned on your blog about some of the people that have found Jesus. Do you have any stories?
Muslims who have found Jesus?
Yes.
Okay.
And so, do you have any first-hand accounts of that? And how, even at that, and I guess it's the same with anybody, but, I guess you're known by your fruits, but I guess how is somebody over there working in that? Do you know? Is it a gut thing? Are there signs? What did you go by, and what would one go by when they're looking for these things? And
well, I have saw that firsthand, where Muslims have converted to Christianity or even Judaism. I have seen it firsthand. Now, one thing that I didn't talk about when I was talking about, are there good Muslims? Well, if you follow Islam, again, you cannot be a good Muslim. But fortunately, you cannot be a good person, I say. But fortunately, there are millions of people, good people, who are affiliated, associated with Islam. In their hearts, they believe that they're Muslims, but also in their hearts, they do not believe in killing innocent people. They do not believe in child marriages or slavery or killing homosexuals. Fortunately for the world, there are millions of people who identify as Muslims who are actually very, very good people who do not believe in those aspects of Sharia. But again, they're very good people, but they're not Muslims in accordance with the definition of what a Muslim is by Islamic leaders. Very good people, but they are apostates.
Gotcha. I guess here in West Virginia, I'm really glad that the people who invited you here did so. I'm glad that you had an opportunity to look, in this area and see. And I want to get into that, I guess just with that, there were I sort of was doing some deep diving on the internet yesterday, and really I probably should have started with the sworn affidavit and worked backwards, but that's not how I do things. So I found, though, that you and I you and I have run across a few different things, similar things. A couple terminologies that you've actually used, and it's one of your, it's one of your precedents for, whether this is an Islamic activity or not. But the interfaith ministries, right? And that's actually, closer to the Z side of the alphabet, if I remember correctly. But with it, I actually have had some run-ins just through just life with West Virginia Interfaith ministries, members of that, people who, it's all really, when we talk about C.A.I.R, it's an acronym, and it, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand it, it's the Center for American Islamic Relations.
Or the Council.
Or I'm sorry, yeah, Council.
Right. Yeah, that's what it is.
And so, but as an acronym, I mean, that's just one, I guess, appearance. You can call it a different name, and I guess for the same thing, it could be, several different things. It could be, some type of it can appear, I guess what I'm saying is, some type of SPLC or NAACP. I ran into a lady who was spearheading this protest in my neighborhood, and her name was Alexandra Gallo, and so she, was associated with the West Virginia Interfaith Refugee Ministry, Clean Water Action, if you know much about them.
Vaguely.
NAACP, Tuesday Morning Group, several different things, but I have her on film saying, none of us are paid. She's wearing a shirt that is endorsing Planned Parenthood, which, works against the American birth rate, which helps. I mean, like I said, it's
killing of innocent children.
It's an onion, but and I'm digressing, but it's just strange, because that group has always sort of stuck out to me like a sore thumb, and the things that they do, I don't understand whether you're a Christian or, I know that they're all Abrahamic, but there's very, very vast differences with the understanding of who Jesus was, who God was. I mean, Allah, and the God of the New Testament, and who Jesus was, the Son of God, and in the Christian theology, it's that's a huge gulf that you can't overcome. So when they talk about things like Chrislam, and I mean, is that basically all just lip service on the Muslim side for the Catholic faith and the Vatican and everything? I mean, is that can't exist as I understand it? I mean, am I correct in that?
Right. I'll give you from what I've found out about interfaith, and again, this is all based on firsthand, and from my talking with imams at mosque who are very much involved in getting interfaith programs started in their communities. Now, coming from a law enforcement background, and most people are familiar in America with confidential informant, sources. Some people say snitches, which is derogatory because there are good people who try to help with information, and that's not really a good term to use. But within the Muslim community, the Islamic leadership, they have a better source network than even the FBI has. And I don't think the FBI is a prime example of a great law enforcement agency in America, especially over the last couple of decades. But nevertheless, the Islamic leaders have been given their marching orders, Sunni from Saudi Arabia, Shiite from Iran, in the communities in America to start these interfaith programs, which is nothing more than developing sources so again, for the advancement of Islam. And this is what one imam told me about the interfaith programs. He said, if I can go to a Baptist church down the street that maybe has 1,000 members in it, if I can get that pastor, preacher, minister on my side, convince them that Islam is peaceful, loving, caring, then it doesn't matter what the 1,000 Christian worshipers that church think, believe, or do, because once they have that pastor under their control, then if one of those Christians do get out of hand and start bashing Islam or going against Islam, then they know that they can go through that pastor and get that person back in line. So they use these ministers and pastors and Christians and Jewish leaders to advance Islam, so that if they have either 50 or 5,000 members, that pastor will keep their people under control. And so it's nothing more. I can only relate the interfaith program as one of the greatest American hoaxes ever put on the American people, almost similar to the COVID. That's the only way I could use an analogy, is that it is nothing but taqiyya, pure taqiyya deception. It is not meant to unite or to get along with our fellow neighbors. It is used as a confidential source program so that they use it also, aside from interfaith, the Muslim leaders also get involved with local law enforcement, because again, if they can get that sheriff or police chief or FBI special agent in charge on their side, then they know that if the sheriff has 500 officers, deputies, that if one of those deputies starts getting out of line, going against something Islamic, maybe trying to start an investigation in a mosque, all that imam has to do is call his friend, who is nothing more than a source, a confidential informant is the way they believe. They call their friend the sheriff to get that deputy back in line. They do this in our government. They do this in Hollywood, our banking systems, our school systems, from elementary all the way through university. And with the interfaith, they do it in our religious communities. I think, Sean, it's important that you have interfaith if you're talking about interfaith between Baptists, Lutherans, Mormons, Catholics, Jews. But when you start talking about having interfaith with maybe a satanic type organization or an organization, Islam, whose straight out goal is to destroy America and Israel, then you plan on very dangerous grounds. Interfaith between different denominations, Baptist, Lutheran, whatever it may be, is you still have the love of this country, the love of Israel, the love of innocent people. Islam is just totally 180 degrees opposite that. They have the hate of this country, they have the hate of non-Muslims, and they even have the hate of people who call themselves Muslims but do not want to advance Islam. So it's a very dangerous, because Islamic leaders, most of these Islamic leaders in our communities, most of them are trained in Saudi Arabia and or Iran, if they're Shiite. Most of them are at the PhD level, very, very smart people, and they run their mosque just like a military operation. And they are very good at it, and unfortunately, we have very innocent, very naive, good-willed people in churches and in synagogues who do not know how to play at that level.
Mm-hmm. And so, I guess with that, once I was doing some, research into, what Hitler did with, his sort of courting of the Muslim world, and how, to me at least, it looks like history is sort of cyclical, and Islam is sort of that conquering force that they use. I guess they had the common enemies, and so the Germans started to relax, some of the sacrificial regulations and everything like that, and he courted the Muslim world, sort of used them, and I mean, we see today, and people who refer to, and I'm not going to throw names out there, but they refer to, what they did with, Nazis, and as a child, happy making time, going in and sort of being that Judas goat for, as a Jew for other Jews, and, if I didn't do it, somebody else would, and now that person seems to be tied. When I did a deep dive, when I ran into these people at the Bechtel Summit, it was a completely staged event, and this woman, who was part of the Interfaith Refugee Ministry, it just was so much stench. I could smell, the Open Society Foundation, and Saul Alinsky. I could smell it from the car when I got out, and I mean, I guess there seems to be a common denominator with that. The money to get people across the border and to the border, and for the boats, and and what looks like to me, am I wrong as far as the people that are coming as this? They come in the name of being refugees, and the needy and the poor, and you would think it's a good idea, but most of them, as I understand it, are middle-aged. I mean, not even middle-aged fighting men, but fighting age men. Right. They come across. They're the previous administrations had basically sort of changed the definition of what a I guess maybe what a youth is, and so I mean, is that and nobody said a word. But
well, it's very dangerous when you're bringing people in from countries that have no system actually to do any type of real background checks. They don't have like a social security system, and I found that out in Iraq when we were trying to vet people to bring them to the U.S. because they had tried or had actually saved American lives, and now their lives were threatened. Mm-hmm. And I'll give a good example of one of my good friends.
Absolutely.
He was an Iraqi police officer in Iraq and Nasiriyah, and his brother was Mohammed Oda al-Rahif, the Iraqi lawyer who had actually started providing the intelligence to the Marines about the whereabouts of the POW Jessica Lynch, as most of us recall, in 2003, that she was captured in Nasiriyah. Well, this family put their lives at risk in order to save Jessica Lynch and many other Americans who they actually provided information that saved American life. Now, I had the task of going in and actually rescuing the Iraqi family, who it was about 9 people who had put their lives at risk to help save Jessica and other Americans. Now, and then they started getting threatened by Saddam Fedayeen and Al-Qaeda, and yes, Al-Qaeda was in Iraq in 2003. So this family was starting to get threats. Their home had been bombed on more than one occasion. And so I was trying to work with the State Department to get this family brought to the U.S. because of their heroic efforts in saving American life. Well, the State Department at that time, they're not interested now, but the State Department at that time said, well, you got to vet the people. You got to go out and do these background checks. And we were saying, we're in the middle of a war in Iraq. There is no numbers we can just punch into a computer and they come back all clear like it is, in the U.S. where you can essentially do that.
Flash your federal ID.
We couldn't go around interviewing neighbors and teachers and etc. But that's the kind of work that they wanted us to do then. But then all of a sudden, when you got Democrats who come in and they just want to let any and everyone in without any type vetting. You cannot vet people from the Middle East and most Islamic countries. It simply can't be done. So you're taking a big chance on allowing any person to come in that you cannot vet. I don't care if they happen to be from France or Germany or wherever they may be. If you cannot vet the person, you're taking a big chance. With the refugees coming into America, 999 out of every 1,000 have been vetted absolutely to 0 degree.
So, and that's, I guess they say if you want to know where America's headed, look at Europe, and, it's, I don't know if you want to speak to it, but, the whole Tommy Robinson
right, in England
issue, and how we see that there are no-go zones, and believe it or not, in 2014 I was censored and wiped off a message board because I had the gall to say that there are no-go zones in Europe. And so, I was literally censored, and I have the screenshots, and I may do a whole episode on that one day. But it doesn't take a stretch of the imagination or a political scholar or some to look and see where we're headed. If and Tommy Robinson, as I understand it, he just got into the fray because he had had enough of seeing out his shop window sex trafficking, and
right,
and all the things that's happened to him. I just.
Well, I think, Sean, that you hit on something that was very important when you talk about no-go zones and Islamic communities, whether they be in Europe or wherever they happen to be, France, Germany, England, wherever. But a lot of people don't realize, because remember, I've been all across the United States investigating mosques. I can tell you from firsthand experience, for every one legitimate, nonprofit organization mosque that you may see, this nice, pretty building in a particular whatever city it may be, for every one that you can document, there's probably 2 to 3 others in that same town that you cannot find, because what they do, and this is according to imams I've talked to, is they set most mosques in America, there's about 3,500 known mosques in America. So there's probably closer to 9,000 to 10,000 mosques in actuality. And what they do with the majority of mosques in America, they're nothing more than, some old house in a drug, gang-infested neighborhood so that they can keep the police, law enforcement, and everyday citizens away, and they do not get nonprofit licenses. They don't have websites. But the majority of mosques are set up like that. And I've been throughout Brooklyn and many other areas in Atlanta and places that if you're not Muslim and you go into these areas at 2 o'clock in the morning, you are going to have serious problems. I don't know how much time you've ever spent in Brooklyn, but when I first went to Brooklyn, there's a mosque at Taqwa. It's a mosque by Imam Siraj Wahaj. He used to be a Christian minister, and then went into Islam, and now he's probably the most powerful Muslim in America. Nothing happens on the Sunni side of within Islam without Imam Siraj Wahaj knowing about it and approving it. And he's out of Brooklyn. He's got a family, a wife in Brooklyn. He's also got a family and wife and other wives in Atlanta. But when I first went to Brooklyn a little over 10, 12 years ago to study some of the mosque and his mosque, I thought I was back in Saudi Arabia. It was that different. You felt every shop around certain areas, streets in Brooklyn, were Muslim. You had the call to prayers on the speakers, and you have patrols, Sharia patrols, that look like police cars that are actually patrolling the neighborhoods. And only because they thought that I was actually Muslim did I not have any problems in that area. But I was with, again, one of my researchers I was with was the Muslim captain, a former Iraqi police officer captain who was on my team when I went around to a lot of these mosques. And it was only because people thought that when they thought he was Muslim and they thought I was Muslim that we didn't have any problems. Otherwise, 2 o'clock in the morning in those areas, they are no-go zones for non-Muslims. There are many places throughout America that are no-go zones if you're not Muslim.
Let me ask you a question. In all your experience, have you ever heard an imam express concern over losing their 501c3?
No, because they don't depend on that.
Right.
They don't depend on they actually don't depend on it. It's a formality for them. It helps them legally, but like I said, the majority of mosques in America are not 501 nonprofit organizations. They have they get their money from Saudi Arabia, and the Shiite get their money from Iran. That's a much more financial advantage than anything the U.S. government's IRS system can give them.
Right.
And they don't have the legalities to deal with if you're 501, the things you can do and can't do in a mosque. And
sure.
So they don't rely on our nonprofit IRS system.
I think that has hobbled, and I ask that because, there are, again, that chilling effect that I mentioned. There are, it just, the whole 501c3 issue and the chilling effect of, and we've seen how it was weaponized during the Obama regime. So again, there's a lot in, and I really, I wanted to kind of lay the groundwork. What you did with C.A.I.R is extremely important. I want to give a lot of time to that. I want to dig into that. A couple other things before we do. I want to pick your brain on a couple things I had a question about, but a couple questions about, but you had mentioned the Sunni and the Shiite, and I guess the Sunni is the majority. As I understand it, I guess I'm looking for that divide and conquer thing, or the fracture, or I know that there's maybe some disagreement over, that some type of satanic verses that Muhammad was tricked by and things like that. I mean, is there enough infighting that they, is that a weakness with them, I guess, is the first thing with it?
Yeah, well, I tell you, let's put it in a military type aspect. Is it a disadvantage to them? It is in certain ways, because the Sunnis do not believe, they believe all Shiite are apostates of Islam. All Shiite believe that Sunnis are all apostates of Islam. So they've got that aspect about them, where they both believe that the other is not really pure Muslim. So when you that is a conquer and divide kind of a thing. But people need to understand that first of all, there's probably Prophet Muhammad had said that there's going to be about 72 different denominations within Islam, not just the Sunni and the Shiite, and there are many, many more that people have never even heard of. That, but what they all have in common is that one common denominator is their objective in Islamic Ummah under Sharia, and to destroy America and to destroy Israel. So they all have that common goal, is to destroy this country and to destroy Israel, the hatred for the Jewish people and all non-Muslims. So they all have that as a common denominator. And they do work together to achieve that common goal. Just look at different motorcycle clubs, the Hells Angels and some of the others. I can't even name some of them. But you got motorcycle clubs. They're all considered one percenters. They really fight and they kill each other, but they have that one common goal, is they hate law and order. They hate our law enforcement system and anyone who's not a one percenter. So it is a disadvantage to them to a certain extent, but they still have that goal. Is they care more about each other than they do about any true non-Muslim.
Sure. One last thing, and then we'll shift gears here. The Mecca, the cube, the as I understand it, and this may be a little off, kilter here with where we're going, but the cube and the aspects of that, and as I understand it, there's aspects of Saturn worship and all of that. I guess can you clarify the whole point behind that ritual and its significance to, is it more significant to some sects than others, or how exactly?
No, it's actually as just important to Sunni, Shiite, whatever they may be, whatever sect they may be. Mecca is, because of Prophet Muhammad. But it does, when you watch the activities that go on in Mecca, you would think as they go around and around in circles, 100,000s of people, it does look like a planetary type system when you mention Saturn. But no, it's just as important to the Sunni as the Shiite.
So let's talk about, I'm going to borrow a phrase, but Homeland Security begins with hometown security, and you were in my backyard. But before you were there, you obtained 12,000 documents, hundreds of hours of video, and you talk I guess about that project, and then let's talk about, I guess, how what we have going on here in West Virginia. But I really admire you for what you do. I think the citizen journalist is, and the info war itself, to use that phrase, is one of America's, I think it's America's white blood cell.
Yeah.
And so, I really admire, you've done a lot of high-speed things, but I admire you for that as much as, all the other things that you've done, because it's so important. But talk about maybe why you did it, and what you recovered, and we'll go from there.
Well, I think that's an important project. That was actually at two parts. It's called the C.A.I.R project, and then the Mapping Sharia project. And I'll go into both of those. But that started in 2007. But it's important for people to understand that I retired from the government after coming back late 2003. I retired from the government because of one primary reason. Two primary reasons. I had a little girl, 5 years old at the time, and I was coming back to Dallas. She met me at the airport with her mom, and she looked up at me and said, "Dad, don't ever leave me again." I had been gone for a year of Arabic class, over 6 months in Saudi and Iraq, and I had another tour. Within 2 or 3 weeks, I was going to go to Oman and be the commander there for over a year, and then into Israel for 5 years, and so it was enough. But it was based on her plus another thing. I started to see the more years I was putting into the government service is that we collected, especially as federal agents working intelligence and counterintelligence, is that we were collecting tons of information, and it would come into our offices, and we would immediately stamp it either confidential secret or top secret, or sometimes even above top secret. They were getting labeled. And 99 times out of 100, the information should have been going out to the public to inform the public, not being hid from them and put in safes that would be there for 50 or 100 years before they got declassified. The majority of classified information is nothing more than simply to keep it out of the hands of the American public, because government officials feel the American public can't handle it, and or it's used to cover up mistakes made by government officials in the field, and they stamp it classified, and it never gets into the hands of the public. So I was tired of information that could help our country, that citizens needed to know about, that was being thrown in the safes. So I left government service in late 2003, and I obtained a position in Dallas as the chief investigator with the Dallas County Medical Examiner, investigating all suspicious deaths in Dallas County. Now, that was my primary job, but it gave me the opportunity for once to work an 8-9 hour day, and the rest of the time was kind of on my own. I could do things that I really wanted to do. And so that's when, in late 2003, is when I started putting together more research about Islam, because the first time I went to the Middle East was in Saudi Arabia in the late 70s. And I'd been going to the Middle East from the 70s to 2003, and things just weren't adding up within Islam, the things that I'd been studying, the things that I'd seen throughout the Middle East. And so what I said is, I want to go out in America, get a good picture of what is happening in regards to Islam, and then I was first, instead of stamping it classified, which I couldn't do anyway, I was going to first give it to the American public, and then I would give it to law enforcement and the media and our politicians, but the American public would get the information first, so they could demand that our government leaders actually go out and start doing their job. So that's what I started in 2003. And many people don't know, C.A.I.R, the Council on American Islamic Relations, is essentially the right hand of Saudi Arabia as far as Sunni Islam. C.A.I.R says they represent all Muslims. Well, to them, when you start talking to them, if which we did, my researchers did, all Muslims mean all pure Muslims, which you can only be a pure Muslim, first of all, if you're Sunni. So when they say they represent all Muslims, they try to put it off as we represent Shia and the other sects of Islam too. But their key word is we represent all Muslims. So the only true Muslims to them, you first of all have to be Sunni. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the parts of the Kia that they use and deceit. But from 2003 through about 2007, I started going out and training law enforcement on how to deal with Islamic-based terrorism here in Dallas and West Virginia. I went all through the U.S. doing that because they weren't getting the proper training. They were not given the facts about Islam. The majority of American law enforcement and our military do not speak one iota, one bit of Arabic. And when I was in Iraq, I saw so many people, young soldiers and airmen, who lost their lives because they did not speak just a little bit of Arabic. I saw some of our soldiers who would approach a car and they didn't even know the word for bomb, explosive, IEDs, police. They didn't know those basic words, how to say hello or thank you. And those words could actually save people's lives, and I saw where it did in my instance. Once we pulled over a car in Nasiriyah, and it had probably 5 or 6 Iranians in it, because at the start of 2003 in the war, the Iranians were coming in by the tens of thousands into Iraq, because predominantly the people in Iraq are Shiite, but of course Saddam was Sunni, mm-hmm. So that was an opportunity for the Iranians to come in and try to take over Iraq. But we pulled over this one car, and it was just me and another agent. We were out patrolling the city, and we saw a group. We could recognize them as Iranian, and I could go into why we could recognize them as that. But sure. We pulled them over, put a little light on top of the car, pulled them over, and first of all, approaching the car, we noticed they had several types of machine guns. They had hand grenades in the labs, an RPG in the back of the car. And at first, when I approached the car, I mean, I could tell because I had done it to hundreds, pulled people over. I knew what was going to happen. You had one guy with his hand on a grenade with his finger on the pin ready to pull it out. And the first thing I did was walk up to the car and started speaking just basic Arabic to him. Hello, how you doing? My name is this. And they were so shocked that they looked at me and the other agent, and they took their hand off the grenade because they were so shocked that, hey, this guy's speaking some Arabic to us. He's actually being polite. And it gave us that opportunity then to pull our weapons on them and then to disarm them. Mm-hmm. But I saw many of our soldiers who knew no Arabic, and they approached the car, and then they ended up getting, dying through an explosion. So when I came back from Iraq, I put together a book for law enforcement and military. It was Arabic for law enforcement and military, just basic greetings, about 200 words or so that would help possibly save their lives, whether it be in Dallas or whether it be in Nasiriyah. But I started training law enforcement from 2003 through about 2007, and this gets into your question about C.A.I.R, how I got involved with C.A.I.R. But from 2003 to 2007, I wanted to get into the head of C.A.I.R. I wanted to know how they operate, and you can't go learn about your enemy when you're doing it from an adversarial type role. Sure. If I were to start, speaking negative about C.A.I.R at the time, I would have never got infiltrated with them. What I started doing in 2003 was hiring C.A.I.R leaders in different cities to go out with me when I spoke to law enforcement. So I was in the backgrounds. After our training sessions, we would go to the hotels, have dinner, etc., and then they would start telling me the behind the scenes, this is how Islam operates.
Can I?
So go ahead.
Can I just? I want to put a pin on that for just 1 second. I just have one quick question, because when you were doing the intelligence and everything overseas, with that, was that? And if you can't talk about it, or if you're not comfortable talking, but as far as domain mapping and things of that nature, was that? I know that social media, in 2003 wasn't what it is now,
right?
But was there an aspect, or was there a forerunner, or anything like that? I don't. I'd be, obviously, if you can't talk about it or don't want to talk about it, I understand. But as far as human domain mapping, and as I understand it, it got its start in the Middle East, and it was specifically for, being able to track the circles of, one's circles and one's habits and everything like that. Did you have the benefit of that at that point, or was that something that sort of evolved after?
No, we actually had been doing stuff like that for a couple of decades that I was in federal service and the military, and as an agent in law enforcement. But it was a much slower system. It took longer to put the pieces of the puzzle together.
I gotcha.
That was the big difference. People have been doing this for centuries. What you're talking about. But the advantage of technology is, if I had 1,000 pieces that I'd obtained about different profiles on people and their cultures and different aspects of the people, now you could throw it in the computer and it would give you the answers a lot faster than what we had to do decades ago.
Okay, and we'll get that's fine, and we may circle back to that once we get into. But I'll let you get back into C.A.I.R there, just as you were talking about that.
That was an important question when you're talking about trying to profile people and what you do, trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Because I can't get into the whole program.
Sure.
But when I was in Saudi Arabia before we went into Iraq, I was at a base called ARR, A-R-A-R, and it's right on the border of Iraq and Saudi Arabia. It was in Saudi Arabia, and a very small town. And I got there about 3 months, almost 4 months before we actually went into Iraq. And so when they say we went into Iraq in 2003, and I've said that I was the first federal agent to ever go into Iraq, during and before the conflict, is because even months before the conflict, we did missions in Iraq. But even with the Saudi commanders on the ground at RR, it was a joint facility that we were using, in the prep to the war. One of the things that you look for in people is when you're trying to, put the pictures of the puzzle together, you try to find out about their leadership. It's simple things as, okay, does this commander, what kind of a car does he drive? What about his family? Does he smoke? You're using things to potentially blackmail these individuals in the future if you could put pieces together. And so we were doing that, and it's done even more so now.
Gotcha.
But going back to how I used C.A.I.R in 2003 to 7, so I could understand their background, how they operate, truly, when they think that I support them, and they thought that I did. They contacted the media in Dallas and D.C., and they did stories on me about how I'm helping law enforcement and uniting the Muslim community with law enforcement, and essentially all I was doing, though, is trying to get into the background of these individuals who I was later going to be targeting in these various operations, legal operations,
sure,
which I'm going to describe. Okay, did you have a question about that?
No, you can you can go on into it.
Well, in 2007, early 2007, I was contacted by individuals working with the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., a conservative think tank. And the founder of that organization was Frank Gaffney, who had been the Undersecretary of Defense for President Ronald Reagan. And Frank Gaffney and some of his leaders, David Yerushalmi, one of the best attorneys in the U.S., they knew and had heard about the work that I had done for the government and my undercover type work, putting teams together undercover. And so they contacted me and wanted to know if I would put together a team of 5 or 6 people. This is in 2007. Put them undercover inside C.A.I.R National, again, which is nothing more than Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, the right hand of Saudi Arabia. They want to know if I could put a team together for up to about 6 months and determine what they are all about. Not just secondhand information. Again, they wanted firsthand information. They wanted, and I only relied on firsthand type evidence. So I agreed to do so as long as I got to pick the 5 or 6 people.
Right.
Because I wanted, in order to do an undercover operation, the success of that operation is going to be the people that you select to go undercover. If you have the wrong people, it's going to be a failure right from the very, very beginning.
And you potentially had a lot to lose given the power that this organization has.
Well, we had a lot to lose, to include our life, plus financially being sued, because these organizations sue everybody. They do it in order to keep the people in line. It's a part of the definition of terrorism. C.A.I.R has sued so many low-level police officers, teachers in our schools. The first time that they get signs that maybe a teacher doesn't want to have an Islamic program in their school, where the kids are having to, to pray to Allah, symbolizing doing that, then C.A.I.R jumps in, will sue these people, and they know that their superintendents and the school boards and others, the community, is not going to stand up and protect them. So it puts the fear in our teachers. That's why you don't have as many people standing up, because they've seen their co-workers sued. You've got law enforcement, street level, who want to do a good job. They understand that there's things going on maybe at a particular mosque where they're getting information about, potentially even child marriage stuff or terrorism. But then again, they've seen other officers who get sued by C.A.I.R, and their police chief or sheriff won't stand up for them. So it puts fear in all the police officers. They're afraid to stand up and do something.
Dave, are they behind? Are they behind? I don't know if you heard the story, but parents, this is several years old, but parents, outraged over, a writing assignment for young children.
Yeah.
And it was, there is no God other than Allah.
Right.
Now,
yeah, that's what I was referring to when the teachers started getting sued.
Okay.
And whatnot, is because of programs such as that. Yes, of course, anytime there's any lawsuits, major lawsuits like that, you can be guaranteed it's one of the acronym organizations like C.A.I.R, ISNA, MANA, MSA. Most people don't know all these other acronyms of the Islamic organizations, but they are all with that one objective, and the only reason, and as C.A.I.R told us during the undercover operation, the only reason they have all of these dozens of other organizations like ISNA, the Islamic Society in North America, is so it will confuse the American people, it will confuse law enforcement, and if one happens to get shut down, then they still have a dozen others that are operating. But Frank Gaffney had asked me to put the team together, and so I wanted to make sure that I had the right people for the team. Now, many people would say, well, why don't you go out and hire police officers to be on your team? They, already know the investigation kind of network, how that operates. They know the legalities of certain things you can do, can't do. But with me being former law enforcement and studying Islam for 30 years almost already at that time, I knew that when you work, I used to do a lot of work undercover with gangs, like the Bloods, the Crips, MS-13, and narcotics gangs. I was involved in a lot of undercover operations like that. Mm-hmm. With that, you want people who have what's called like the gift of gab, where they can go in and they can start talking to these gang members, and you know, that's how they obtain intelligence. With Islamic groups, when you're doing undercover work with Islamic groups, the last thing you want is someone going in practicing the gift of gab, who just talks, has an ego already, think they know everything, think they can, you know, solve the crime. They're the best investigators in the world. That's the very last thing that you want. You want people who are going to go in, who are going to be more humble, sit back, say nothing, just listen. And that's how you get information from Islamic leaders, is you do just the opposite you would in gangs or narcotics type activity. You go in and your people need to, and in Islamic undercover operations, you've got to understand Sharia law. And that's the one thing that I train my people on. My lead researcher, who is the best investigator in America, I would consider, is my son, is Chris Gaubatz. He knew nothing about Islam, knew nothing about C.A.I.R, but he was interested. He wanted to protect America and do his small part, and you know what he could for America to educate Americans and law enforcement in regards to Islamic-based terrorism. So he had the heart. Is one thing I was looking at for an undercover person. They had to have the heart. They had to love this country with all their heart. That was the one thing that I looked for. Second, they had to be kind of humble. They weren't in it for the glory. They were there just to, you know, to listen. And many people don't know how I found the other 4 or 5 undercover people. They weren't high-profile people. They didn't have backgrounds in like citizen journalists and stuff. They didn't have that kind of background. They knew nothing about Islam. I went on Craigslist in 2007, and I put an ad for administrative assistants to help me out with just a small business that I had at my home administratively, so that it would give me an opportunity to learn about that person, see what makes them tick, see if they have what it takes. If their life is threatened, are they going to go berserk, or how are they going to react? Because it's very important when you're dealing with Al-Qaeda or ISIS-type-minded people, that if you put in a jam, how are you going to react? I mean, your life and the lives of other people around you are at jeopardy if they don't know how to handle themselves. So I was able to evaluate another 4 to 5 people, and I got them on my team slowly. And then I told Frank Gaffney, who, again, was Ronald Reagan's Undersecretary of Defense, I told him, I said, I'm ready. We can start, you know, doing tests to get in, because to get in C.A.I.R National, one would think, well, they have a fortress, that they have so many security procedures. How are you going to get people in undercover inside C.A.I.R National? How do you go about doing that? You know, this is the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas. You know, the security's got to be very tight. So before I could just start sending somebody up there, I had to have a reason to be sending them. Well, C.A.I.R has a program where they actually, I say hire, the student no pay, but they have about 20 to 25 interns come in for about 6 months at a time, and then they devote their labor up to 40 hours plus a week, you know, to C.A.I.R. So I train my people under Sharia, how to dress, how their mannerisms. There's so many things that come with Sharia that people don't understand. When I go into a mosque, I can go into a mosque within 10 to 15 seconds, and I can tell you what sect of Islam it is. Is it Shia? Is it Sunni? And is this person, you know, a very, very pure Muslim who advocates Sharia 100%? And a lot of it is based on their manner of dress. A simple thing is when you go into a mosque, that if you wear jeans, which most people wear some kind of just pants or jeans, then you've got to roll up the bottom of the pants about 3 inches above the ankle. That's in order to keep the devil out, shaitan, to keep the devil out of the mosque. It makes no sense, but it doesn't have to make sense. That's a part of Sharia. You know, and a simple thing is Sharia is really based on doing everything opposite the Christian and the Jew. And I'll give you a couple good examples of that when I say that, is do everything opposite the Christians and the Jew. Now, for instance, most Christians and Jews, the majority, if you wear a watch, what arm do you normally put it on? I ask you, Sean.
My left.
Normally.
Left arm.
Yeah, on the left. Normally, not always, but routinely you'll see Christians and Jews put it on their left arm. Now, when you wear a wedding ring, it's normally gold, you know, for the male, normally gold, and which hand does it go on? On the left hand. So under Sharia law, you do everything opposite the Christians and the Jew.
Oh, wow.
If I wear a watch, it goes, when you start watching the pure Muslims, like when I used to watch Osama bin Laden, when he'd come on and do interviews, our law enforcement had no idea what to look for as Sharia compliance, but you would notice that, well, he's got the watch on the right hand. He's got a silver ring if he wore a ring on the right hand and not on the left. There's so many things that are opposite. Like, for instance, most Christians and Jews, if you have a beard, you normally have a mustache. Not all the time. So there's all kinds of fads, but normally you do. You got a mustache. So under Sharia law, you have a beard, but you're supposed to shave the mustache so that you'll be opposite the Christians and the Jews.
Can I ask you a question real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm trying to determine this. Is it just because they're being opposite? Is it a right hand of God type thing?
No, they're being they want to be opposite because they consider the Christians and the Jews as the most evil people in the world, worthy of killing them anywhere in the world, whether it be West Virginia or Saudi Arabia.
So it's a spiritual thing. It's basically,
yeah, they consider them to be as close to the devil, shaitan, as you could possibly be. It has nothing to do with really the right or the left, because if Christians and Jews were to wear their watches and rings on the right hand, then they would choose the left hand.
It's just that they feel they're righteous and they're going to do. Okay, I got you.
Yeah, they want to do the opposite of what their most evil enemy in the world does.
Okay, I got you.
And so that's what I train my people on, is how to properly dress, what to wear, how to wear. When to wear shoes and socks? Do you wear socks in a mosque? Many people don't know that. You know, when the men go in, do they have to wear socks, or do you not wear socks? Well, it's a 50-50. You know, you never know. It doesn't matter if you wear socks or don't wear socks in a mosque, as long as your feet and your toenails are clean. But that was all a part of Sharia. So I taught them every aspect of Sharia so they could go in. See, when I would train law enforcement, I trained many FBI, and they tried to put people undercover in mosque, and they'd go in with a gold watch on their left arm, and they would have a beard with a full mustache, and they would try to go in as pure Muslims. You can't do that. You're spotted automatically when you do stuff like that. If I go into a mosque and don't know to roll up my jeans, I could be saying everything correctly, but they're going to give me no information because they say, well, he's not Sharia compliant, he's not Muslim, he doesn't know what he's doing.
Gotcha.
And so that's what I taught my researchers to do. Go in Sharia compliant. Now remember, let's say there's 25 interns inside C.A.I.R during that period. 5 of them are mine, 20 of them are legitimate college students, whatever, who want to go in and help C.A.I.R. They're Muslim. My 5 were not Muslims. They were all Christian, and they knew nothing about Islam, but they knew more about Sharia law than the legitimate Muslims did, the interns coming in. My people actually knew how to behave in accordance with Sharia law. They knew the proper way to pray, in a mosque. A lot of people don't know that. Mm-hmm. But I taught them things like that. So immediately, my people were the ones that rose to the top within C.A.I.R. The C.A.I.R leaders like Nihad Awad and Ibrahim Hooper, the public spokesperson who's always on the news for C.A.I.R, mm-hmm. they started picking my interns for the special projects because not that they were talking a lot, but they were Sharia compliant, they listened, they wanted to learn, and so that's what they started doing, and there come a couple projects like they needed the head of security for C.A.I.R, and so who did they pick for head of security for C.A.I.R to go to their banquets and other functions that they may have? They picked my son as the head of security for C.A.I.R. And C.A.I.R, although they had a lot of security guidelines, they didn't follow them. And that's the first mistake of any organization, is you don't follow your own guidelines. That's how I got my people in, because I did test subjects first to go inside C.A.I.R to see, well, what kind, do they check their IDs? Do they go out and check their, tags on the vehicle? Do they do any vetting? Let's call it, using that term again. Mm-hmm. And I found out immediately that they didn't. They had all kinds of written rules that they're supposed to check their driver's license. They had people in law enforcement who they would run their driver's license through. They had all that on paper, but they didn't implement it. Mm. So that's how I got my 5 people in. Never once were any of my 5 people ever asked to produce any type of identification. Not once. And so immediately, they were able to get in. They were trusted, and there came to a point in C.A.I.R where Nihad Awad needed, literally box after box of information, documents shredded, because it did contain criminal evidence. He didn't come out and tell the interns that it has criminal evidence, but he had a basement full of boxes that needed to be shredded. And so he got the group of 25 interns together and said, we've got all of these documents, we got to get rid of them. Who would like to volunteer to do this? Well, all they had was a $19 shredder there at C.A.I.R, and none of these college students, the legitimate Muslims, none of them wanted to sit there all day, one page after another, shredding documents. But the people who raised their hand and said, I'll do it, were my people, the people I had undercover in there. And immediately, Chris and the other interns who were doing the shredding or looking at the documents noticed that it contained criminal evidence where C.A.I.R was saying they needed people to start supporting Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden and many, many other things that were criminal in nature. And so my son came to me and said, hey, Dad, this is what's in these documents, and I don't want to really shred them. What do we do? Well, we had a decision to make. I got with the attorneys, and we all decided, hey, we don't want this criminal evidence shredded because we want to turn it over to law enforcement at the end of this program. Mm-hmm. And so we decided, I told my son, go back the next day, tell Nihad Awad and Ibrahim Hooper that you've got a plan for these thousands of documents instead of spending hours and days shredding one piece by one piece, that if they would help get it all loaded up into my son's car, that he would take it to one of the big shredders in Washington, D.C., and within a matter of minutes, all these boxes would just be dumped and shredded and it'd be over with. Well, they thought that was a perfect idea, Nihad Awad and his leaders. So they all helped get all these boxes into my son's car, and then my son immediately drove to the hotel where I was at and gave me all the documents, all the boxes, so that we could preserve them. And I took them in as evidence and started cataloging everything that we got. Well, this went on well over 6 months. And Sean, I have to ask you a question at this point.
Go for it.
Are you familiar with the 35 Jamiat al-Fukra compounds throughout the U.S.?
Are they they're a school, basically? They have some type of
No, you're thinking of an actual type school,
okay.
Islamic school. No,
okay,
this is where Jamiat al-Fukra compounds are based out of, under a leader, a terrorist wanted by the U.S., Jalani, out of Pakistan. And there's 35 compounds in the U.S. which are terrorist training camps. And if any one of your listeners want to Google Jamiat al-Fukra or terrorist training camps in America, they will pop up. But there's about 35 of them. I mean, some of them are huge compounds. I put up people undercover in these compounds for up to 2 weeks at a time.
Now, let me back up. Were these was one of these compounds where the brothers, they found the corpses of the children and everything like that, or am I confusing?
Son of Imam Siraj Wahaj that I was talking about.
Yeah. Okay.
Earlier, his son in New Mexico.
Okay.
Who was no, that was not one of the compounds.
Okay. I gotcha.
If you were to type in Red House, R-E-D, and then House, Virginia, terrorist compound, people would be able to pull them up and start seeing what it's all about. But it's these people who follow the Pakistani terrorists. They set up training camps in the U.S., all across the U.S., in various states, East Coast or West Coast. So as my operation was going on inside C.A.I.R., people started to, I was kind of vocal. I was out vocal because I wasn't directly inside C.A.I.R., so I would try to stir up things in the media so they could get the reactions of the, like Nihad Awad in C.A.I.R., and my son and other researchers could report back to me what they were talking about after I'd done something. Like I'd put something out in the media, and then Nihad Awad would be upset and start talking to my son and saying we need to stop this guy Dave Gaubatz and etc. Up to various threats against me, and I got to see their reaction. So I kept the C.A.I.R. leaders busy, focused on me, so they couldn't focus on the real work, was developing plans to really to overthrow America. But what I had during this time, since I was in the media quite a bit, I started having people from these Islamic terrorist camps who started contacting me. And one of them was in Red House, Virginia, only about 40 miles from where I live. And he told me when he contacted me, he said, Dave, I've read about the work you do against, C.A.I.R. I know that we have major differences, but he said the one thing we have in common, he says that neither one of us like C.A.I.R. and what they do. Now, they did not like C.A.I.R. because C.A.I.R. had, over the years, had taken tens of thousands of dollars from these Jamiat al-Fukra compounds, because members from these compounds would approach C.A.I.R. and say, can you help me with passports or this other type of legal work, whatever it may be. And C.A.I.R. would then essentially just steal their money and never do any work for them. So they asked me, they said, will you work with us and file in lawsuits against C.A.I.R., and in return we'll give you tons of information about C.A.I.R. and what they're really up to. And they told me, now this is coming from terrorists inside compounds. I visited their compounds, and they said, Dave, will you get us the best attorney that you can, the best attorneys? And I said, well, what do you consider the best attorney? And they said, well, the best attorneys in the world are Jewish attorneys. So they wanted Jewish attorneys. So this is coming from Muslim terrorists. And I said, sure, I had the perfect person, David Yershami, who was essentially my boss within the C.A.I.R project. And so I started going around getting sworn affidavits from these Muslim terrorists and giving them to a U.S. Army, who filed them in federal courts against C.A.I.R about all the atrocities and thefts that C.A.I.R had been doing against their own Muslim people. They're supposed to be supporting the Muslim people, and here they are stealing tens of thousands of dollars, and we had affidavits from Muslims saying that they were doing that. Mm-hmm. So just in federal court, just last year, I think it was, actually CSP, the Center for Security Policy, won the case against C.A.I.R based on these, they're representing Muslim terrorists. But it was a give and take. They did give us lots of information on how C.A.I.R operates.
I'm pretty sure that, and again, I've never read the terrorist handbook or the Muslim handbook, but I'm pretty sure that a Jewish attorney kind of would make you an apostate. I don't know.
Remember, it's before the advancement of Islam, it doesn't.
I got you.
You know, that's the key of deception. As long as something fits in the plan of advancing Islam, it's perfectly legal.
Wow.
It's perfectly okay to do it.
Gotcha.
So a Jewish attorney, if it would advance their cause, that's exactly where they would go, because they said Prophet Muhammad would do the same thing. But anyway, we needed to shut the operation down after the several months we were in there, and we trying to figure out how to do it. We had affidavits that we need from a federal judge that we needed to be served to all the C.A.I.R executives, many of them in different states, who were involved in, you know, the theft of taking money from fellow Muslims, stealing money from them. So we didn't know how to really close down the operation. And then we decided, well, the best way to serve all these subpoenas to the executive leaders was to get them all together at one place and then serve them then. Mm-hmm. So every year C.A.I.R has a banquet, an annual banquet, where they invite senior law enforcement from all over. They invite these interfaith ministers, but they have maybe up to 1,000 people at their banquet. And that means they're going to have all the executive leaders there at the one time, so that we would be able to serve them subpoenas. But how do you do that? You know, how do I get in and start passing these subpoenas out? But again, my son was head of security for C.A.I.R, so it was kind of easy to get into banquet. And what we did was, you had Nihad Awad up on stage, and you had, I think it was Congressman Keith Ellison or Andre Carson, I can't remember who it was. One of the congressmen was actually speaking. And that was the time when Nihad Awad was on stage that I needed to be able to get up there and serve him his subpoena. And that would be the key then for all my other interns working there to start passing out these subpoenas to other executives, and to actually giving them to law enforcement were there, and other high people in politics and Hollywood who were there, so they could see what C.A.I.R was really all about. So we had hundreds of these subpoenas that we wanted to get passed out. So the only way that I could get up on stage, and the only way I could get in, is I dressed as actually a blind Muslim, you know, with the glasses, the cane, and I had an African American lady who came in Sharia compliant as a Muslim, who would help me get through the crowd and everything in there, because I'm blind. We sat at a table, and then when I thought it was time to go up on stage, there was 4 security that the congressman had around the stage. But I knew, because I'd done my research, the way that I could get up on stage, first of all, the security are going to be hesitant if it's a blind man. You know, an older blind man walking up on stage, they're not going to run in and tackle him, which I was hoping they wouldn't anyway.
Sure.
And then also that I had this lady with me that was beside me. There was an African-American lady who was helping me up on stage. So the security, I walked by them, and we just kind of nodded at security, and they looked and nodded back, didn't know what to do. And I got up on stage, and I tapped Nihad Awad on the shoulder, and he said, "Who are you? What do you want?" And I said, "I'm here to serve you a subpoena by a federal judge based on your theft of monies from Muslim people you're supposed to represent." And they didn't know that we had been in C.A.I.R for 6 months. They had no idea my researchers who were there at the banquet were a part of my team. And that was the key then. All these researchers just started passing out hundreds of affidavits to people, and that's how we ended up closing the operation, because after that night, they knew that those interns well, actually belonged to me, because we went in the media the next day and said they did, and we closed it that way. But that day one that my book came out, Muslim Mafia, they didn't know that it was also coincided with that day. They did not know that we had that operation going until that book came out that morning. But I think, as I discussed with you, we knew that immediately if C.A.I.R finds out that you've had people undercover in the organization, and then you write a book about it, about taking 13,000 of their documents, that they're going to sue you. I mean, they sue for a lot less. Well, they didn't realize the people that we had, in the background, the attorneys and other people, the Center for Security Policy and my publisher, WorldNet Daily. They had no idea that we had all these people. They thought it was this little Dave Gaubatz and his son. They didn't realize the extent of it. So day one, they went to court. You talk about the Constitution and the First Amendment. They say they believe in it. Well, they wanted the book banned, and they told the federal judge that they wanted me to return the 12 to 13,000 documents back to them, because they said Dave Gaubatz stole our documents. And as you and I discussed, we were kind of in the back clapping our hands, because when they told the federal judge that I had their documents and they wanted them back, the federal judge essentially asked them, "Are you sure you want to say this?"
Right.
And they said yes. And what they did was admit to a federal judge day one, after the operation stopped, that those 12,000 documents were theirs.
Legit.
And everything in there, the criminal activity, was indeed theirs. So it saved us years of having to authenticate those 12,000 documents, because day one they admitted to a federal judge that it belonged to them.
Wow.
So that's kind of how it ended, and that lawsuit started in 2009, and it's still going on today.
Wow.
It has not ended in 2021. We haven't went to court yet. Millions of dollars have been spent, and that's what C.A.I.R does. They told Chris and my other researchers, when they sue someone, they don't care if they win or lose at the end. They want to drain that person emotionally and financially, and then at the end, they know the media is going to ignore it if it's against C.A.I.R, and if it's for C.A.I.R, then the media is going to support them.
Do you think that there is a way to strengthen legislation to avoid lawfare from organizations like this? I mean, I don't really, that's a little out of my wheelhouse, and maybe yours too. But I think you've seen it enough to if there are legislators listening, how do you? Because eventually it's whoever has the most money is going to win. You see it well, for example, like with the InfoWars, it's lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit after, and so lawfare is as dangerous to democracy as I mean, in a way, I realize that the courts are, but how do we fix that?
Well, 10 years ago, I would have said, we have a level playing field in America, and there got to be a way within the justice system to fix this. But, over time, I've come to realize we don't have a level playing field. Even with the Supreme Court, we have a 6-3 majority conservative. It's not a level playing field. Mm-hmm. The Democrats don't play a level game. They have the media, they have Hollywood, the universities. They don't play fair. They don't even pretend to play fair. We essentially had an election stolen from the best president, or one of the best presidents the country's ever had.
I agree.
So is there some kind of legislation now that you think that, not you, but right, we, the American people, think that some politicians are going to get together and stop what C.A.I.R is doing, which is nothing but lawfare jihad is what they are engaged in, and that's what they call it, another form of jihad. They used a pen, the tongue, and a sword. And that's just another form of jihad for them. There's so many Democrats who stand up and every day support. They know all about C.A.I.R and C.A.I.R being a terrorist organization, but they still support C.A.I.R. The media will support C.A.I.R before they will you and I. And I went into Iraq and done other things, and you've done different things. We're good American patriots, but they will support a terrorist organization before they will you and I. So is there something that can be done now that some politicians are going to come up where that's not nice to play that way in court? No, it's not, because the Democrats aren't nice. They know what's going on, and they support stuff, what C.A.I.R does, and they support the lawsuits that C.A.I.R is involved in. Many of these politicians have publicly supported C.A.I.R in their lawsuits.
Is it dollars or dirt that drives their support? It can't be ideology. It can't be.
No, that's not ideology. It's the power. They know that, first of all, politicians, why are they bringing millions of illegal immigrants in and want to give amnesty up to maybe 11+ million people? It's not because they like the people or they care about the people. It's because of the votes that they would get. Democratic politicians also know that if you pander to C.A.I.R, that you're going to likely get millions of Muslim votes through that. They don't care about it. It's not about the ideology. And votes equates to politicians as money. So it goes back to the money and the power.
So, in my backyard, I'm looking at a picture here. I'm seeing a book, Sharia, the Way of Justice. I'm seeing Legislating Fear. I'm seeing a course on Islamic Sharia. And it could go on, and as I understand it, there's thousands in this library.
Are you talking about an Islamic library?
Well, the in the mosque that you went into on One Valley Drive, South Charleston.
Right.
So let's talk here in West Virginia, and I knew that it was there, and like I said, it had caught my attention. It just running into socialists. But it's just one of those things. Maybe I just wanted to deny that it was there, and cognitive dissonance. I don't know, but like I said, I heard your interview on the Tom Roten show in June, and it was one of those flag moments that hey, this is important, but it's also one of those things where life goes by, and we're back though, and we're here, and it's even worse than I could have dreamed of. You have rated the mosque extremely dangerous.
Right.
The highest rating that you can give a mosque on the scale of 1 to 10, and so. One thing that I guess, and maybe as as an analyst and in security and everything else, I mean, I'm sure that you have seen patterns, and working in the public sector, I do as well, and I talk to a lot of different people in the sales industry, and I have noticed more of a well, it's just a pattern that the majority of the people that I talk to from, this the Charleston area, the majority of requests that I get, through sales and things like that, sales leads, are predominantly Middle Eastern. And as far as the I guess first starting with the mosque, what is the average niche here in West Virginia? I'm going to assume that they're probably educated, professional background, probably something, well,
that would be with the leadership. You're talking about they're very well educated, most of them in either Iran or Saudi Arabia, or many Islamic schools, many of them PhDs. But the majority of the worshipers would range from just what you may see in a church, someone who, at a lower paying job versus a doctor in a hospital. You're going to see a wide range of people. You're going to see, and with the women, a lot of people don't know. Some people are starting to catch on to different aspects of Sharia, but there's absolutely nothing within the Quran or said by Prophet Muhammad that a woman has to go to a mosque. She does not have to go to a mosque. It's not a requirement within Islam that she goes to a mosque to pray. It's only if her guardian or husband allows her to go, and it's the same in America. You will see some that actually go, and it's much fewer than the men. And when they do go, they're always separated, either into a separate building itself, where they just have a monitor that they can listen to the imam, or it may be behind a wall of where the men are at, but they're always separated. But there's no requirement for a female to actually go to a mosque.
Okay.
Never.
Gotcha.
The house is where they're supposed to remain.
I have this plan that, given that we have the PC culture, I have this plan to get the entire, Muslim, I'm going to get the entire thing canceled, I think, Dave. And how I'm going to do that is by, we have cancel culture, and it's extremely powerful. So I think what I'm going to do is write to these imams here in Charleston and ask that, that's a little offensive to me. I think they need to be referred to as persons now, not imams. Mom is sort of a I'm being facetious, I'm sorry, but but I think that would, if we could just get them canceled, I think that would fix everything.
You mean get what canceled?
Well, let's shoot for the faith entirely, but no, I'm just joking there, but no, it is, though, and that's one thing that again, there's this duality, and I don't understand if it's atrocious to a person, to overtalk a woman, or to what's called mansplain, to the same woke people that want to turn around and say, oh, well, yeah, it's his culture to want to marry a 7-year-old, rape a 7-year-old.
Right, it's his culture.
So, and so I don't understand how you can be, I don't understand the duality there, and I guess I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but...
well, I have too, Sean. I've seen it. You would think a lot of these liberal women's groups would be standing up for the Muslim women who have been abused, who continue to be abused, the female children who are being mutilated, who are being married at such a young age. But then again, they know that these women have absolutely no power. The liberal women in these feminist groups do not care about other women. They don't care about these young girls from the Middle East who are being abused, or even the young girls here in America. It all comes down to liberal or conservative. If liberals are doing it, it's fine. If conservatives do it, then it's criminal activity being done. I have to bring up, I think now's the point where I talk about exactly what you hit on, and that's where they talk about, well, it's their culture. And you may have heard this story before. I'm not sure if I talked about it on Tom's show, but for your listeners, I had myself and a female researcher went to Nashville, Tennessee a few years ago, and we were going to spend about 2 weeks in this particular Somalian mosque where Somalians from Minnesota had, by the hundreds, had moved to Nashville, set up a mosque. And so we went there for about 2 weeks, and we're going in as practicing Muslims. And I started noticing in their library at the mosque, there's tons of information advocating child marriages. There's information from Saudi Arabia directly telling the men it's their responsibility to behave like Muhammad, marry young children when you possibly can, encourage your sons to do it. All kinds of materials in there about that. And me and my female researchers started going to Sharia classes at this Nashville mosque. And while we were in the class, there was this little girl who was sitting next to my female researcher, and the little girl told my researcher, she said, my arms are hurting, and my legs hurt, and my back's hurting. And my researcher said, honey, what's wrong? And the little girl showed my researcher the bruises and the welts on her backs and on her legs. My researcher said, well, what happened to you? And the little girl said, the imam and others, they hit us when we don't do things right in Sharia. They beat us. And we'd witnessed the Islamic leaders going around and hitting the children with like cane-like. They were about 2 feet long, really thin, just whipping them with canes in the mosque. Young girls, 5 and 6 years old, and little boys they would beat. We witnessed that. And then this little girl, she said she was 7 years old, and she said, and my husband does this, and my husband does this to me. And that's when I said, okay, time out. That's what I told my researcher. It's time now, when I find criminal activity like that I immediately report it to law enforcement, because I want to give them an opportunity to do something about it. Go in and protect this little Muslim girl. You know, you're supposed to have C.A.I.R and other organizations protecting the Muslim people, but I haven't contacted C.A.I.R and asked them to help this little girl, and they laughed at me and refused and said, this is mind your own business. Well, I expected that from them. I haven't expected it from politicians who I called on both sides of the aisle, and they said basically the same thing. Mind your own business. That's their culture. Leave them alone. You're an Islamophobe, a hater, and a racist. Okay, that's what I get from the left and the right, not just the left. I got it from the left and the right. And so I went to the sheriff and the police chief and to the FBI in Nashville, and we had everything on audio, video. We showed them what the little girl had said. We never put that out publicly on video about her, but we showed it to law enforcement. And they essentially told us the same thing. Well, that's their culture. They have a right to do that. And I said, they don't have any right to do that in America. I said, in Saudi Arabia or Iran, they may have been given that right. In America, they have no right to abuse children. They have no right to be marrying 6 and 7 year old little girls. They have no right to be raping little children. Not in America. It doesn't happen. Well, they refused to do anything, and so I then started putting all the law enforcement, the senior law enforcement, all of their information out on the internet and what they had said. They weren't going to protect this innocent young child, and I do believe all children are innocent, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, whatever.
Sure.
That they're all innocent, and I wanted help for this little girl, and they said they weren't going to do it, so I put the information out. Finally, Child Protective Services did come in. They were able to protect this one girl, and ended up that mosque was closed in Nashville. But that was only literally through an act of Congress that I got help for that little girl. So can you imagine what we're really up against in America? This isn't just happening in Nashville. It's happening in West Virginia. It's happening in my state of Virginia. When I go to the mosque, Sean, I told you I rely on evidence. Although I know what I'm to expect when I go to a mosque, I don't perceive that it's there unless I actually see it. And so when I went to Charleston, I have to see the evidence firsthand. Mm-hmm. And all through these mosques that I've been to across America, I see this information. I see advocating for child marriages, for killing homosexuals here in America. I see that kind of material dated 2020 and stamped the Saudi government. So I see that kind of information, and one would think it would be easy to get law enforcement or politicians to put an end to it. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine if there was a Baptist church, and inside the church they had material advocating child marriages?
Oh, wow.
What would happen?
Yeah,
rightly
absolutely.
So, you would have teams of law enforcement going in and raiding the place. They would investigate the people at the church and go back 100 years to find out what was going on. Yet, they allow it here with the Muslim, the Islamic groups to do that. It's two forms of justice. It never should be allowed in America. I don't care what religion you're claiming to be.
I want to touch on Tennessee one more second. I want to talk about a post that you made on your blog.
Okay.
And it was an analysis, December 28th, about the explosion in Tennessee. You said, the deep state is in total control. You'll never be provided the truth about the RV explosion in Nashville. All news media are compromised and are as far from journalism as possible and more closely aligned as communist cronies, similar to the pseudo-news media in China and Russia. There's still a handful of journalists left in America, but they will soon either comply or be forced to leave the profession. Now, I talked about an onion. We're still within the same onion with that explosion. Would I be correct in saying that to some point that we have the same players, maybe higher level players, but or am I off base on that?
No, I think you're right in line. We have the same level players that we're talking about in Tennessee with the explosion, and it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. It's not going to all of a sudden get better. The only thing that's gotten better is the coronavirus, and we all know that was political, that once Biden came in, then all of a sudden there was going to be a magical cure. Now, we have people in place that hate this country. Political leaders that truly hate this country. They're not even ashamed to say they are ashamed of this country anymore, starting with Obama.
They've built their career on it. They
built a career. AOC, they are not ashamed to say it. And during the McCarthy years of the 50s, when he would track down communists, I mean, they practiced behind the scenes, but if they ever got called out, they would deny it. Oh, we love America. We love the flag. But now there's no hiding it. At sporting events, they kneel to the flag. They're not hiding it, and majority of people are behind them. I'm talking about the team owners and the key players. They all support that. And so now it's getting to be a majority of the people in America are behind the destruction of this great country.
What are you had mentioned, the threat level from right. This one particular mosque, just this right. mosque. But I know there's a multiplier there. One mosque is going to equal hundreds or thousands possibly of people.
Right.
What type of insurgency? And I'm not talking about like you said, I'm not talking about the apostate. I'm talking about radical. Well, again, and I understand.
You're talking about a Muslim,
yeah. Let me change it. Yeah, let me.
Like they use their terminology.
Yeah, I need to fix that in my thinking.
It's hard to do because we've been programming.
We have. But
so it's normal.
But what are we looking at for the West Virginians that are listening? How many? What's a count? What's an estimated count of insurgents here in West Virginia right now who want nothing more than to destroy the American way of life through any means that they can?
I'll give you a good example. If I can go to a mosque and find out everything that you saw in that affidavit, and I can do it in 2 to 3 hours, and I would testify under oath that this is what I found, you have to, it's only common sense that if someone is going to a mosque every week, 4 or 5 times, they've been doing it for 10, 20 years, that they also know what's going on in that mosque. The way that I would get my final analysis on what's going on within Islam in America is that the mosques are simply safe houses for terrorist sleeper cells. When it is time for action to be taken, major terrorist events or even a war within America, that the Muslims know that they are in power, these sleeper cells are going to become active. And that's what mosques are. They're nothing but safe houses for people to do their planning, their strategies. They're like-minded. They're for pure Muslims. Now, I'll give you an example when I talk about the apostates, say in your area in Charleston. Mm-hmm. I don't remember. I've been to so many mosques. But say that mosque has, say, 1,000 members, which it's not near that. But say they had 1,000 members at that particular mosque. You may get 200 that actually I would consider pure Muslim out of that. The majority of Muslims in that area don't go to the mosque. They are the good people that identify. They are some of your neighbors and your doctors who were born into Islam and are so afraid. They've been terrorized themselves. They're so afraid to leave it because it's a death penalty offense. It doesn't matter if it's in South Charleston or if it's in Afghanistan. They've been programmed that you can die, and people do die, if you leave Islam. So out of 1,000 people, say, in South Charleston, only about 200 are faithful, pure Muslims as defined by the imams. So you have about 200, say, for instance, in South Charleston, and then you have 3,500 known mosques and about 6,000 to 8,000 other mosques. You have hundreds of thousands of pure Muslims in America, and how many Muslims did it take on 9/11 to do damage?
Mm-hmm. I gotcha.
So if they had coordinated efforts, I've asked the imams this after I've got to know them, and they trust me and truly believe that I'm Muslim. I've asked imams, one at oh my goodness, I can't even think of it. It's in Fairfax, Virginia. Mm-hmm. Darlo Hijra Mosque in Fairfax, Virginia. I had asked one of the imams, they had 2, I said, what is going to be the next type of attack in America? Are you going to have another 9/11, or why hasn't there been another 9/11 type of attack? And they said, Dave, it's like this. They call me Daoud, an Arabic name. They said, Daoud, it's like this. In America right now, we are winning. So if we were to have another 9/11 type of attack in America, it would set our efforts back 30 years because we don't need one right now. We're winning in America. We got politicians, we got Hollywood, we got the media, we got everybody that we need. Things are falling into place. But what we will have are these so-called lone wolf attacks, because immediately the mosque will say, oh, we denounce that attack, we hate terrorism, and then the media, of course, cover for them, and law enforcement is out to protect. They'll stand in front of the mosque before they will you or I at our house to protect us. they'll stand up for these people because their moms will denounce that terrorist acts. There is no such thing as a lone wolf attack. Mm-hmm. These things are coordinated. The people, their moms, know that they're going to happen, and then they can immediately just distance themselves. Just like in Boston and at Fort Hood. When you talk about Fort Hood,
yeah, I was about to say. I was about to say, unless it happens at Fort Hood, and then.
Right. And that was this, this job, whatever they called it at the time. But no, that was a coordinated effort. The guy had been coordinating with terrorists. He'd been going to a local mosque. He very much knew what he was doing, and there were people that knew that it was going to happen. Our moms know. They don't have to go out and and start telling people at the podium like they would do in the Middle East. They don't have to stand up there and say, I want you to go out and do something in Boston next week. They know there's enough people that are going to go out and do these things over a period of time, and then they can just sit back and denounce them, and the media and politicians are going to support the Muslim groups over you and I, and they will have armed guards outside the mosque instead of outside of our homes.
Question, and you've been very good. I really appreciate the almost 2.5 hours here.
Wow.
You've been very good with it, and I by no means, you go as long as you want. As long as I have room on my device, we're good. But I don't know if you've thought about this. I haven't. Actually, it popped into my head as we were talking, but. The one of Obama's campaign promises was that he was going to build a civilian force as powerful as as powerful as the military, basically, and equally, I forget exactly how he worded it.
Right.
But now what we have here is the era of contact tracing again, and it goes back, I guess, maybe to domain mapping in a sort of a way, but with contact tracing. Is there a threat? What is the threat that we see the infiltration of contact tracers and people who, and again, maybe I'm trying to war game this, but I had used the term medical Sharia before when we talked, concerning the mask and the compliance and things, but what is there a threat there that again through another channel that that we could see something like that happen? Because they seem to be pretty effective at getting into places that can cause trouble like that, constitutionally, because that's a gray area with contact tracing right now. And
define for me what you're talking about with contact tracing so that I'm on the right page.
Okay, well, basically, if I get sick or if I have COVID, then again, it goes back to, who was I in touch with? Where did I go? What restaurants did I visit? But they have to have boots on the ground to do such things.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you a good example of that. When I went to Charleston, I went to the mosque there. Never before have I ever had to produce ID. But when I went to the mosque during the COVID times, first of all, they were only allowing a certain amount of people in. You couldn't stand around and talk. You couldn't, I just didn't have the leeway to do the freedom to do what I'd normally done in the past. I had to give my driver's license when I got there, because then they were able to see my true name, had all of my information on my driver's license. There's a big danger in this, is because information now is being shared all over. Information that you don't really want to get out, everyone has it. I mean, there is a big danger. There's information almost overload. There's so much information out about people.
Sure.
And Americans do not realize the threat we're up against with Islamic-based terrorist groups. They are very well funded. They are very well educated at their leadership positions. very, very dangerous. They're not afraid to say that they hate America, they hate Israel, and they want to, and all their manuals are have information about killing innocent people. Something I want to mention before we go, I know we only have a few minutes, but Sean, when I went to Imam Siraj Wahaj's mosque in Brooklyn, I came across an 81-page manual that they were selling from his bookstore, and it really talked about essentially how to kill U.S. law enforcement officers in America, and then how to go underground. That was, and they were selling it for $10. Can you imagine again? It's a double standard. If a church were to have some kind of manual like that, what would happen?
Oh, wow.
In that particular church?
Absolutely.
But the first thing police say is then they will say, well, that's a constitution, that's a First Amendment right for them to have it. Now, it wasn't a First Amendment right for me to write a book about what I found out about C.A.I.R, but it's a First Amendment right to put a manual together how to kill law enforcement, and that's what Imam Siraj Wahaj and other leaders do. That kind of material is everywhere.
Gotcha. What does the average West Virginian, how do they combat this and be within the within the confines of the law? I think knowledge is power, but day one, once this podcast stops playing for them, what are your recommendations? How do we fight this?
My recommendations, what I've analyzed, and I've done this for decades, I've done it for the government, and I would say the same thing to the government right now if I wrote a report, is that we are on our way to a civil war in America. That's plain and simple. It's going to happen. Whether it happens this year, next year, the year after, we have been pushed into a corner, the American people, and both sides. You can even see and feel the hatred between the left and the right. Politicians don't mind even saying they hate conservative politicians. They don't mind doing that. We are on the verge of a civil war in America. What I could tell the people in West Virginia or wherever it may be, always do things legally, ethically, and morally. Try to always follow the U.S. Constitution. But what you can do is have a pending civil war in America is to prepare your families. Make sure you're ready emergency-wise with food, water, your security. Take care of your children. Get involved in what's going on in your children's school activities. But prepare your families for a pending civil war. That's as simple as I could get it. I would write the same report, except classify it secret or top secret if I was still with the government. That would be my conclusion. I've been studying and researching, and there's no way out of it. There's going to be a civil war in America. And even the great, Rush Limbaugh started talking about that, a potential civil war. And people that we would have never thought about saying such thing, we would have laughed 5 and 10 years ago. Hannity and Tucker and other people have talked about a pending civil war. Well, that would be my conclusion, is what Americans are facing. There's no way out of it. You can only talk so much. You can only negotiate so much. American patriots are not going to allow this country to be taken over. No one wants a war. But as looking at it from paper and evidence, I don't see any other thing that can happen, so make sure your families are prepared.
As a friend of mine said, and he's now considered, I guess, a terrorist, he said, I don't want war, but, if it has to come, let it be, basically to paraphrase him, with me, so that my children know peace. And I can't say that is a radical thing to say. Or maybe it's a radical thing to say, but it's a truth. It is a truth.
No one wants it. I mean, I was in Iraq. I saw what happened to the young innocent children after a bomb had been exploded in their area, and I had to pick up This one little girl, about 6 years old, her skin was coming off her body where she'd been burned in the blast. The people who are hurt at war are children. They are the true people who suffer. No one wants it, but at some point, wars happen. It's happened for thousands of years, and it's not going to stop here in America. There is going to be a civil war. There are going to be innocent people that are hurt. No one wants that, and we hope it can be prevented. But just take care of your families, prepare your families so that maybe they can have an America like we've always wanted.
Dave, where do they find your book? How do they find you? How do the people, I guess, reach out to you as far as downloading the affidavit? Whatever. How do they find your work?
Well, the best way is, if you Google my name, it's a 50-50 chance, going to be positive and negative. But my only blog I have, the only organization site that I have, because I don't want to be under anyone's actual authority to tell me what I can do, can't do, what I can say, what I can't say, is I've got a blog, wearenotafraid.blogspot.com. And if anyone has any direct questions for me, they can email me at davegaubatz@gmail.com. And my phone number, I don't hide anything, is 276-930-1636. And if anyone wants research in their area, any organizations, contact me. I do not charge for my work that I do. When I go do the research, the only thing I ask is if you get me down there and you throw me somewhere that has some kind of bed and give me a little food for a couple of days. But I don't charge for the work. And then I do an affidavit so people can provide that to the law enforcement and local politicians.
Fantastic. Well, Dave, you're a patriot, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and discussing this with us. And if you ever want to come back, it's an open invite. I have really enjoyed this. This has been very eye-opening, and I feel I've really only brushed the surface of it, but it's I hope you felt it did you justice, and really
I think it was good, Sean, of what you're doing. And because when I talk about there are only a few journalists anymore with any integrity, I'm talking about primarily the civilian journalists like yourself who are trying to get the truth out. Whether the truth falls one way or the other, it's just based on evidence and fact, and that's what you want to get out. You do have a local patriot there, Brenda Arthur, who is in your area, South Charleston, a great person. She and a group had invited me to do the research there. So people in your area do have someone who's really in touch with what a lot of the politicians are doing and thinking, and she's so active, and I would recommend her as being a guest on the show.
She is actually, I'm ahead of you. She's actually on my list. I reached out to her, but again, it's one of those things where it's one of those out of sight, out of mind things. You know, the news cycle, the way it changes, it's like, I guess the equivalent of yelling squirrel back in the old day. You're on to one thing and all of a sudden squirrel. And it goes a different way.
I understand. There's many good patriots out there, and that's a good thing.
Well, Dave Gaubatz, I really appreciate you, and I look forward to the next time you're on. I really appreciate you coming on, sir.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes.
Purple shrines on our head. Phenobarbital makes us dead. To heaven's gate we will go. So climb aboard
for God, for country, for truth, for justice, for the Republic. You're listening to the Powder Monkey Podcast on PirateInfoWars.com.